Two young women who had spent their whole lives dancing walked into a lumberyard one day and decided to take over the family sawmill, and neither of them had touched a piece of industrial equipment before in their lives. That was Emerald and Jade Breon, the daughters behind Lumber Capital Log Yard in Cogan Station, Pennsylvania. And when they stepped into those roles, their father Ken had been building that business for 15 years before a single camera ever showed up. The question most people never think to ask is, why did a sawmill in the middle of rural Pennsylvania suddenly explode to over 200,000 YouTube subscribers, and what actually had to happen behind the scenes for that to be possible? The answer has almost nothing to do with the internet. It has everything to do with a man who started over, repeatedly, and a family that decided to do things differently from almost every other operation in the timber industry. But the full story is more layered than that. Because by the time the channel found its audience, the business itself had already been restructured. Ken had separated his logging operation entirely from the log yard. Terry had taken over the mill side. The daughters were listed as co-owners, and the whole operation was running on a philosophy that almost nobody else in the industry was following at the time. So what really happened to Lumber Capital Log Yard, and how did one family's repeated decisions to start over become the thing that kept them alive? Ken Breon did not grow up in the timber industry. He is, by his own description, a self-taught first-generation logger, which means everything he learned about felling trees, managing a mill, and running heavy equipment he figured out himself. He started Ironwood Acres in 2005 as a residential tree removal business. That is a long way from running a full sawmill operation, and the distance between those two things was not crossed in a straight line. In the years that followed, Ken's business changed form repeatedly. At one point, he was climbing trees at local properties and removing them limb by limb from the top down. At another point, he was selling Pennsylvania native trees. At another point, he was making mulch. Every version of the business was built around a single principle: use every part of the tree and waste nothing. That principle eventually led him to firewood. Firewood was a natural byproduct of residential tree removal, and it served a real need in the community. But as the firewood side of the business grew, Ken needed space, a lot of it. That need for space is actually what led directly to the purchase of the property in Cogan Station, where Lumber Capital Log Yard now operates. The firewood business created the yard before the mill ever existed. The transition to logging came after that. Ken made his first sawmill purchase after deciding to move away from residential tree removal and toward processing timber at scale. That first machine was a Wood-Mizer LT-15, an entry-level portable sawmill. From that starting point, Ken spent years building the kind of knowledge base and equipment inventory that would eventually support a serious operation. What is important to understand here is the timeline. By the time the YouTube channel launched in August 2020, Ken had already been running this business in various forms for 15 years. The channel did not build the business. The business, with all of its hard-won infrastructure and knowledge, was the foundation that made the channel credible. That distinction matters more than it might initially seem, because it explains why the audience that found Lumber Capital Log Yard stuck around. This was not a couple of people who picked up a camera and decided to play sawmill. This was a functioning operation with 15 years of real-world experience behind it, and viewers could tell. Wary they indeed Momosta. When the channel launched in August 2020, the timing was not accidental. The COVID-19 pandemic had created an unusual situation for the business. Ken has discussed this directly. COVID brought both challenges and unexpected growth opportunities. Demand for firewood and lumber products held up. People were spending more time at home and, in many cases, more money on home improvement and heating. At the same time, the pandemic had changed how people were consuming media. Outdoor and trade content was seeing a surge in viewer interest across YouTube. But here is what most people who watch the channel do not immediately realize. Emerald is the one who built it. The family's own website describes her as the mastermind behind the YouTube channel. She learned how to capture footage, write narration, and structure the kind of content that holds viewer attention. She is also the one who took on learning the sawmill equipment specifically so she could demonstrate it on camera, including taking the lead on the Wood-Mizer LT-70 when the family upgraded to it in 2024. Jade operates differently. The family describes her as the manager, the one who gets things done, handles the operational side, and does much of the actual filming behind the camera. While Emerald is typically in front of the lens, Jade is frequently the one holding it. This division of roles is meaningful because it reflects something the family figured out early. Running a sawmill and running a YouTube channel are two separate jobs, and pretending otherwise is how channels fall apart. By clearly delineating who does what, Emerald handles content and sawmill operation on camera. Jade handles management and filming. Terry handles the website, Facebook, deliveries, machine maintenance, and online orders. The family avoided the organizational chaos that kills a lot of creator-run businesses. What rarely gets mentioned in any coverage of the channel is that both Emerald and Jade are trained dancers who continue practicing weekly with their instructor. That detail is not incidental. It speaks to a level of discipline and structured training that is fairly unusual in the sawmill world, and it shows up in the way the channel is produced, which is noticeably more organized and intentional than most content in the niche. At some point in the channel's growth, something happened that changed the structure of the whole operation, and it did not make headlines because it was not a scandal. It was a business decision. Ken separated his logging operation from the log yard entirely. Today, Ken runs Ironwood Acres Timber Harvest as its own standalone operation. His role is primarily in the woods, harvesting old-growth timber for local landowners in north-central Pennsylvania. He is not the face of the YouTube channel. He is not usually the one on camera at the log yard. His job is in the field. Terry, meanwhile, runs Lumber Capital Log Yard LLC as a separate entity. And Emerald and Jade are not just employees. They are listed as owners and operators, partners in the milling business. This restructuring matters because it changes what the channel actually is. Lumber Capital Log Yard is not Ken's channel about his logging business. It is Terry, Emerald, and Jade's channel about their milling business, with Ken's logging operation as the upstream supplier. The two are connected. Logs that Ken harvests feed the mill, but they are legally and operationally distinct. Understanding this is important for anyone watching the channel who assumes it is run the way most family farm or trade channels are run, where the patriarch is the center of the operation. Ken is described on the family's own website as the man who spent years setting up the lumberyard so he could pass a thriving business to his kids. The handoff has happened. The kids are running it. Grandpa Larry, Terry's father, is also part of the daily operation. He serves as the go-to mechanic and construction resource for the yard. Son Judah, who is focused on his studies and training as an MMA fighter, assists occasionally, but is not a primary presence in the business. The core operating team at the log yard is 3 women and a grandfather. One of the things that makes Lumber Capital Log Yard genuinely different from most YouTube sawmill channels is the zero-waste philosophy, and it is not a marketing slogan. It is the operational logic the business was built on. Ken's history of trying to use every part of every tree goes back to the residential tree removal days. That mindset carried forward into the mill. Today, the waste products from milling operations at Lumber Capital Log Yard are processed into charcoal and compost. The smoke wood products, wood for grilling, come from material that would otherwise be discarded. Every revenue stream in the business is connected to the same core principle. Nothing leaves the yard that can still be used. This philosophy has practical financial implications. In a business where margins on raw lumber can be thin, having secondary and tertiary products derived from what would otherwise be waste creates additional revenue layers that help offset operating costs. Ken has discussed this directly in interviews, describing diversification as one of the key strategies that keeps the business financially viable. The equipment upgrades tell their own story about where the business has traveled. The operation began with a Wood-Mizer LT15, a portable entry-level mill. Over the years, it progressed through multiple machines, eventually reaching the Wood-Mizer LT70 Super, which the family installed and documented in March 2024. The LT70 Super is a fully hydraulic, heavy-duty commercial mill, capable of cutting logs up to 41 inches in diameter. That is not hobbyist equipment. Moving from an LT15 to an LT70 Super over the course of roughly 2 decades represents a complete change in operational scale. The LT70 upgrade also created content. Emerald documented the installation and training process in detail, including a full tutorial on the operator's control station. This is a good example of how the family approaches the channel. Every significant development in the business becomes an opportunity to show the audience something real. Not a promotional announcement, but an actual process that viewers can learn from. By mid-2026, Lumber Capital Log Yard had passed 224,000 YouTube subscribers and surpassed 80 million total views. Those numbers represent one of the most substantial audiences in the small-scale sawmill and timber niche on the platform. The channel started uploading in August 2020 with no advertising budget, no network backing, and no pre-existing audience. What it had was a real business, a knowledgeable family, and Emerald's willingness to figure out how to translate all of that into content that someone sitting in their living room would actually want to watch. The growth was not instant. Building to 6 figures of subscribers in a niche this specific takes consistent output over years. The channel publishes frequently, at times daily, and the content spans a wide range: milling walnut slabs, processing railroad ties in summer heat, firewood deliveries around central Pennsylvania, equipment maintenance, and the day-to-day reality of running a small family sawmill. That range is deliberate. It mirrors the actual complexity of the business, rather than packaging it into a single repeatable format. The channel has also developed multiple income streams beyond advertising revenue. There is a Patreon page offering behind-the-scenes content for paying members. There is a YouTube channel membership. There is a merchandise shop at lumbercapital.com. And the business itself, the actual lumber mill, continues to sell hardwood lumber, rough-cut hemlock, firewood, smokewood, charcoal, and compost to customers in and around central Pennsylvania. In March 2026, Wood-Mizer, one of the largest portable sawmill manufacturers in the world, featured Lumber Capital Log Yard on their official podcast, describing the family's journey as going from a total unknown to respected logger. That kind of recognition from a major industry manufacturer is not given to channels that exist only as content. It goes to operations that the industry itself takes seriously. The Woodpreneur podcast, which covers business growth in the wood industry, featured Breon in August 2025, where he spoke about family business dynamics, the role of technology in improving efficiency, and how COVID created unexpected opportunities. The title of this video asks what really happened to Lumber Capital Log Yard. The honest answer is, it kept going. That might sound anticlimactic, but it is actually the answer that takes the longest to earn in this industry. Most family-run sawmill operations do not survive generational transition. Most YouTube channels built around a single trade do not maintain audience growth past 2 or 3 years. Most zero-waste philosophies in small manufacturing are abandoned when the economics get hard. What happened at Lumber Capital Log Yard is that a man who spent years climbing trees one limb at a time built something real, and then handed it to his wife and daughters rather than holding on to it himself. Terry, Emerald, and Jade took that structure and turned it into a media operation that now generates income from multiple directions simultaneously. The logging side and the milling side run as separate legal entities, which protects both. The content side generates revenue independent of the lumber market, which protects the family when wood prices fluctuate. As of 2026, the family is still in Cogan Station, still uploading regularly, and still operating both Ironwood Acres Timber Harvest and Lumber Capital Log Yard LLC as active businesses. Emerald continues to operate the LT70 and produce content. Jade continues to manage operations. Terry handles the infrastructure that holds the whole thing together. Grandpa Larry is still on site. Judah is still pursuing his MMA career. The channel's most recent coverage on the Wood-Mizer podcast summed up the family's philosophy in a phrase that Ken offered himself: "It's not what you cut, it's what you leave behind." For a family that built a business on using every last piece of every tree, that sentence works on more than one level. Most stories about rural family businesses end with the next generation leaving. The Breon family tells a different story, one where the next generation not only stayed, but built something that made the original business more visible, more viable, and more resilient than it had ever been before. The channel is still active and still growing. The mill is still running. The logging operation is still supplying it. And the family has built enough diversified revenue: lumber sales, firewood, smokewood, charcoal, compost, YouTube ad revenue, Patreon, memberships, and merch, that no single source of income is the thing holding the operation together. The question Lumber Capital Log Yard leaves viewers with is not a complicated one, but it is a real one. If you had a family trade business, whether it was a sawmill, a farm, a garage, or anything else, would you be willing to hand it to the next generation completely, the way Ken did? Or would you hold on to the center of it?